I'm Hugh Hewitt, live from Studio West. I want to begin by welcoming our brand new affiliate, Talk Radio WGSV, 1270 AM and 96.3 FM, in Lake City, Guntersville, Alabama. I want to go to Guntersville. It is a northern part of the state, biggest lake in the state of Alabama, and I'm glad to be having them join the board that is the Hewitt Show. We are on 471 affiliates now, and we are glad about that. We cover the morning, and we get you to work. And overnight, terrible news. There was a shooting at East Lansing, Michigan, on the campus of Michigan State University. I have been on that campus a few times. My Mycroft got his PhD there. That's my older brother, the scientist. And so I would go visit him when he was a Sparty, and I had nothing else to do because there's not much reason to go there for other than Michigan State reasons. 3 murdered, 5 in serious condition by a 43-year-old who then killed himself. No details yet on the gunman. This followed by hours, a man driving a U-Haul truck on streets in Brooklyn, knocking off pedestrians and bicyclists. No word yet on the rampage there, but 2 episodes of mass violence in the United States. It is not unexpected. It's always terrible and tragic. The situation in Turkey has gone from terrible to worse. But an 18-year-old man was pulled from the rubble hours ago after being underground and under the concrete for a week and a day. So your prayers are working. People still continue to be found. Shortages of shelter and medical supplies pose danger to quake survivors, according to the New York Times last night. A week after a devastating earthquake struck Turkey and Syria, families are crowded under tarps, cardboard shelters. There's a severe shortage of tents, housing, and medical supplies. It's imperiling relief efforts as cold continues to take its own toll on the elderly, the weak, the infirm, and the young. A little baby, Aya, is 2 months old and was rescued from the rubble. She's being breastfed by a nurse at the hospital that she's residing at. She's been identified. Her grandfather says she's going to go live with her mother's sister, who's also got small children. So there's hope for Aya. There's so little hope for so many people that we are very encouraged. I want to thank all of you who have donated to our effort to raise money for Syria and Turkey for relief efforts run by Food for the Poor, which is a legitimate, so effective relief organization all across this country. I'm so proud of Americans. People are rallying at various communities to help on this show. Hundreds and hundreds of you every day contribute. You hear for the first time, Hewitt's got a place and I can trust it. And you head over to the banner at hughhewitt.com, or you text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 91999, and you'll get a link to Food for the Poor. Or you can actually call 855-359-4673. 10 tons of supplies were collected in Dallas, Texas. Give a listen.
In just a couple of days, North Texans have donated thousands of items, just pallets at DFW Airport, canned goods, personal hygiene items, and winter clothes, working nonstop to pack everything up and get it here to the airport. Their first shipment to Turkey, Turkish Airlines offered to fly all of this overseas for free, all of this desperately needed.
I think that airline deserves great props. And I am very, very pleased by Americans' generosity, your generosity. And this is I'll do it again tomorrow. Today's Valentine's Day. I got that wrong at the start. It's the 14th. But tomorrow's the 15th. I'm going to stop it. We're going to pause a couple of weeks and then refocus our efforts, as we traditionally do, on some country in Central America that is broken and bleeding badly. But thank you, all of you. The banner will come down tomorrow. So if you've been making a mental check that you're going to assist in Turkey relief, please do so today at the top of hughhewitt.com. There's lots and lots of UFO stuff. Let's start with our favorite press secretary ever, Karine Jean-Pierre, yesterday talking at the White House, cut number 14.
I know there have been questions and concerns about this, but there is no indication of aliens or extraterrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Again, there is no indication of aliens or terrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Wanted to make sure that the American people knew that, all of you knew that, and it was important for...
All right, let me ask anybody at all. Did your opinion change one way or the other because Corrine told you? Obviously, they know that she's got a huge problem of credibility, and therefore they sent out John Kirby. Admiral Kirby actually knows his stuff, so Admiral Kirby gave a press conference, cut number 16.
I don't think the American people need to worry about aliens with respect to these craft, period. I don't think there's any more that needs to be said there. There is no U.S.
Thank you, John Kirby. Cut number 17. More John Kirby.
There is no U.S. surveillance aircraft over Chinese in Chinese airspace.
Okay, even Chinese claimed airspace.
There is no U.S. surveillance aircraft in Chinese airspace.
Okay.
I love Kirby. Now, you see, Kirby is a pro, and Kirby's been doing this a long time. He's a spokesperson at the Pentagon. He's an admiral, and they roll him out, and he just repeats, with a correct emphasis, airspace. Now, we've got surveillance all over China, not over it, but we are on the legal outskirts, as they can be on ours, beyond the territorial waters of the United States. And I'm sure we have covert stuff, and they've got covert stuff. We're just not flying balloons over their country. Cut number 18, more.
Any of these three objects were surveilling. We couldn't rule that out. And so there, you want to err on the side of safety here in terms of protecting our national security interests, and the fact that these objects could have and likely did at some point in their path transit over, potential military sites of ours or sensitive sites.
Number 20, please.
There is no question in our minds that that system was designed to surveil, that was an intelligence asset.
And that's why we let it go across the country. He didn't answer that. John Kirby wasn't involved in that decision. Poor John Kirby is dealing with, he must look around. He's been dealing with serious people his entire life. You don't get to be an admiral in the United States Navy unless you're a smart person. So he's been dealing with smart people his whole life. And the one time I met John Kirby, he was acting as the master of ceremonies for the Heroes of the Battlefield Award that my friend Mel Spees took me to. First time I met Joe Dunford, honoring the corpsmen and the medics in the United States military. And Kirby's an impressive guy, and I wish they just would leave him up there. He did do one final comment, it's a minute long, on all of the non-alien CCP machinery in the sky, cut number 21.
Can you specify what exactly it's getting from a balloon that they're not getting from orbiting satellites that go over us like dozens of times?
With the caveat that we haven't fully recovered everything, though we have recovered some things from the bottom of the Atlantic, and we're analyzing that. But with that caveat that we don't know exactly what this balloon was surveilling or what its capabilities were. So just in general, and that's an important caveat that I'd like you to remember. When you are at a lower altitude than space, you could perhaps get a better fidelity of imagery, for instance, of things on the ground. When you are not moving at the speed of a satellite, and therefore, only getting seconds over a site, when you can maneuver left, right, slow down, speed up, like this thing could, then you can loiter. If you can loiter, you can soak in a little bit more. You can spend more time over a sensitive site.
That is the single most honest thing that has come out of the Biden White House since this whole thing began. Tom Cotton, I'll save Senator Cotton, who's going to be joining me a little bit later. It's Tuesday, so it's Drucker in York. We're going to be talking about Nikki Haley, of course. She is announcing tomorrow. Donald Trump has a new name for Ron DeSantis, cut number 22. Maybe not. Cut number 22.
That's strong. That's a lot of muscle there. My hand didn't sink in like it does with a lot of people. And then I see him without his shirt one day. And this guy is strong. And he's not fat. That's all power. That's all muscle. I want to tell you that. And I said, Ron, you're one of the few I say it to. Don't walk around with a jacket all the time. Take it off. People are going to see the real Ron. But he's a great guy. He's a tough.
And so, Donald Trump making nice with Ron DeSantis. Who knew? I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt.
You're one of the few I say it to. Don't walk around with a jacket all the time. Take it off. People are going to see the real Ron. But he's a great guy. He's a tough.
Donald Trump complimenting Ron DeSantis yesterday, and I'm wondering, with David Drucker, my guest from the Dispatch, what you make of that, David?
Well, I'm never sure what to make of what Trump may or may not say on any given day, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, you wrote a book about what Donald Trump thinks, and Nikki Haley is declaring tomorrow for president in Iowa. Ron DeSantis widely believed to be running. They have Mike Pompeo running. We've got maybe Tim Scott running, maybe Greg Abbott. We'll get a full stage by the summer. What do you think the situation is vis-a-vis Nikki Haley as she prepares to formally announce that she is running?
Look, Hugh, I'm headed down to South Carolina this afternoon. Going to be there for Nikki Haley's announcement tomorrow. I'm going to stick around for the beginning of Tim Scott's soft launch for the presidency, which comes Thursday evening, also in Charleston. And I always think in this case, and from reporting in Trump's shadow, that the simplest answer is the easiest answer. They want to be president. They think they should be president, and that's why they are running for president. And I know a lot of people like to look at this and wonder if they're really positioning themselves to be a vice presidential candidate or be a cabinet official, but you don't undertake the planning for the presidency for a campaign and then embark on a campaign, which is one of the most difficult things a human being who's an American citizen can do, unless it's something you covet. And maybe you covet it too much, and maybe you're willing to make too many compromises, but you want it. And so what I'm watching for here is how are they positioning themselves? And are they going to do the number one thing that I learned in Trump's shadow a Republican primary candidate for president needs to do? And that's show that you're a fighter. Do it authentically, but show you're a fighter. And the best way you can show you're a fighter, I think, in the eyes of Republican voters, is go after the front runner and explain why you should be the front runner instead.
Now, David, I did an interview with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Tuesday night in California at the Nixon Library. I've interviewed Nikki Haley. I've interviewed Tim Scott. In fact, everyone who's running for president, including the former president, I've interviewed many, many times. And to me, everyone falls into one of two categories. Those that you never know what they're going to say, and they might not know some subject matters, and those who are very, very well prepared. I will say about the former president, the former Secretary of State, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, these are all very well prepared candidates. These debates will not be like some of the debates we've seen in the past where candidates were just clueless about whole ranges of policy issues.
That's correct. I think you're going to see a smaller field. I think in part that's a function of the fact that Trump is running. And the serious candidates who run are people that have either been in the political spotlight, been in government service, or been fixtures in Republican politics for some time. So I think that they're going to be able to speak to issues, not always in a way that everybody might agree with, but in ways that are drawn on direct experience and knowledge. And I think that will change the nature of these debates. And, I think a lot of us get maybe caught up in fighting the last war. This is not going to look like 2016. I don't even think it's going to look like 2012. I think it's going to be a tighter field, definitely a multiple candidate field, but not unwieldy the way 2016 was.
David, I'm in Switzerland. You're in Switzerland. I don't have an opinion on who the nominee ought to be, but I have an opinion on the questions that a nominee ought to answer. I think the dozen or so debates that are going to be held are going to decide this. And I told that to everyone. I don't care what the polls say right now. Talk to me after the first debate. Talk to me after the fourth debate. Talk to me after the sixth debate, and I'll tell you who the front runner is. What do you think of my assessment?
I think your assessment is pretty good. I think a lot of people forget, and I say this all the time. I feel like a broken record. I remember when Ted Cruz got into the presidential campaign in the spring of 2015, and he opened up at 5% in the polls, and a lot of people said, I thought Ted Cruz was supposed to be the candidate of the base. Remember, this was before Trump, and he's only at 5%. Well, that ship has sailed. He's going nowhere. He ends up the runner-up, getting more delegates than anybody except for Donald Trump. The whole point of a campaign is to run. It's just like a football game. You start with 0 points. Let's see where you are at the end. The only question is, do you have more points than your opponents? And so I think you have to look at this that way.
1 minute left. Senator Cruz was widely believed to be running for president, but now I'm beginning to think he's not going to. He's going to focus on his reelection campaign, doing a cotton, in other words. I'm a young man. I can wait. I don't have a window that's open that I've got to go through like Nikki Haley, like Mike Pompeo. Tim Scott could also take a pass, but it doesn't look like he's going to. What do you think? Is Ted Cruz going to get in? Because traditionally, Republicans nominate the runner-up from the last competitive race.
I know, which makes him formidable. I think Ted Cruz will stay out as long as Donald Trump is in. I presume Donald Trump will be in, until the end. Either he wins or loses. I think that's the same for Rick Scott. I think Tim Scott is going to run. And although Tom Cotton didn't say so, and his kids are young, and I have firsthand experience with that, I think that's where maybe Trump has had a little impact on the field, where you have some of these candidates that may have wanted to run populist campaigns or would have. They look at a populist like Trump in the race and a populist like Ron DeSantis if he gets in the race, and have decided to focus on what they're doing now. And I think Ted Cruz is in that category, at least unless the field were to shake out a lot differently than it looks today.
Thank you, David M. Drucker of the Dispatch. We'll be talking with you. We'll look for your work from South Carolina. Stay tuned, America. Valentine's Day. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio West. At 8:18 last night, a gunman opened fire at Berkeley Hall and then the Michigan State Student Union. And by the end of his rampage, 3 students were dead, or 3 people were dead. 5 others critically wounded, and the gunman had taken his own life. He's 43 years old, not affiliated with the university, black man. We do not know anything more than that. And I turned to Byron York for a reaction. Byron, good morning. It's a terrible way to start Valentine's Day, but it is the news that is breaking. I'm a little bit afraid to go further than that because all we have is secondhand accounts on Twitter, and there are deep fakes out there. Anything to add to my bare bones announcement?
No, I really don't, because the thing that's so important with breaking news stories is you don't know what happened. I mean, you don't know. You probably don't know even the basics, like how many people are killed or wounded, and then you certainly don't know anything about the gunman, and you don't know anything about motive. You probably don't know anything about gun. I mean, you just don't know anything. So sorry about that.
That's it. You and I are in the same place, just the basics. Now, you and I both know a lot about former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. You and I have both interviewed her many, many times. What does Byron York think about her candidacy?
Well, what I think about her candidacy is what I'm thinking about this emerging Republican Party presidential race, because first of all, she'll make it an actual race. She'll be the second candidate in the race, so it's not a one-man race anymore after Donald Trump announced on November 15th and then hasn't done much since then. But the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, he was in Washington recently for a governor's conference, did a lot of media, and made clear that he's thinking, a lot about running for president. Usually that means you do run for president.
Yes.
And he had a small event in downtown Washington that was off the record. I don't know why it was, but the fact of the event was not off the record. So I go to it, and he speaks a little bit. I talk to him. And the thing that struck me about it is that it was like a flashback to 2012, to a pre-Trump Republican Party politics. And the question of the race, for me, the 2024 race, the question is, are we going to go back to a pre-Trump Republican politics?
Interesting.
Or
So Byron, let me
is,
immediately. I think when you say that means going back to an issue-based race, where
yeah, I mean his remarks, were about fiscal responsibility, about the things he has done as governor. Many of us pre-Trump thought that governors were clearly the best presidential candidates because they'd been executives. and it would have just fit in completely if Trump had sort of never happened. And so the question is there any going back? Personally, I don't think so. I mean, I think I haven't spoken to him. I didn't speak to him in depth about anything. But there are parts of the Republican Party that I think Trump has just changed, if not forever. I don't want to say forever, but for the near future at least. And Ron DeSantis obviously realizes that. I've spoken with him about that, and there's just kind of no going back. So this is a convoluted answer to the question about Nikki Haley, in the sense that I think that she would, even though she worked for Trump, and is going to have kind of a difficult path negotiating her way around Trump. That is all the things she's asked about him and the things he says about her and all that stuff you do when you're a candidate running against another candidate, in this case running against Trump. I think still it's this kind of throwback to pre-Trump Republican politics and whether that can sell or not when Trump himself
No, you broke up on us there a little bit, Byron. So the key question for me is, if it's a reversion to the norm, that means it's a reversion to an issues-based question and answer format in debates and in campaign stump speeches, where candidates are expected to know a lot. Now, the best preparation to be president is to be president, so Donald Trump has an edge. But you've got Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis, Chris Sununu, Tim Scott. These are all very smart people. I mean, very smart people. Do you expect that the debate process may be based more on substance and personality this time?
It all depends on Trump. First of all, you're absolutely right about all of those people. There's been this kind of little debate in politics the last few days whether Ron DeSantis is Scott Walker. There are some people on the left who are kind of hoping that Ron DeSantis would flame out like Scott Walker did, a great Republican hope in 2015. And I went back and I read, the sort of political obituary I wrote, or presidential obituary I wrote for Walker at the time. And the real problem with the Walker campaign was that he didn't know enough. He was very versed in what he did as governor of Wisconsin, and he was really a hero to some Republicans today for what he did and what he stood up to, in the sense that the left threw everything they had at him to try to knock him down, and he stood up. So Republicans admired him, but when it came time to talk about national issues and especially versed in it, he just didn't have.
Now, something's happening to Byron York's phone. I think did the UFO come over your house and take your phone, Byron? You're back.
It did. We've been having phone problems this morning, and I'm trying to stay in one place. Maybe I should walk around.
No, now you're back, because I got one very specific question for you. If we've got 8 candidates on the stage, and somebody asks, was it a good idea to kill Qasem Soleimani? All 8 of them will have an answer, and Trump will have pulled the trigger. Does that make a difference?
Oh yeah, it does, because Trump did stuff that the conventional wisdom said you weren't supposed to do. Now, I don't think moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel was just a huge world-changing event, but the fact is, Congress had voted for it for decades, and then no president had done it, and Trump just did it, and the world didn't end, as had been predicted earlier. So Trump does have that record of action, and that his followers know that he'll just do something, and they worry that other more conventional politicians will be influenced by the conventional wisdom that tells them that X or Y is just too risky to try.
The reason I bring that up is this morning I read a report in the New York Times that the elected president of Iran, he's not the leader, the supreme leader, is in China, meeting with Xi. And so the new axis of evil is Russia, China, and Iran. And a serious question would say, was it a good idea to kill Soleimani? And Trump will say, well, I did it for this reason. And Mike Pompeo will say, I advised him to do it for this reason. And Nikki Haley would say, if I had been there, I would have agreed with it. And they'll all talk about it, right? But it's a serious question. What do we do about Iran? That's so different from 2016, Byron.
Well, I mean, everybody was pledging, if I remember correctly, in the 2016 Republican primaries to throw out the nuclear deal. And maybe they all would have done it, but Trump did it. Back to your point. So this is unusual, virtually unprecedented in American history. In
our lifetime, it's unprecedented.
Where you have it, well, unless anybody lived, in Grover Cleveland times,
correct,
where you have an American president who served a term and then left and then ran again. In other words, he's not running for re-election, but he still has a presidential record to tout that all his voters remember.
I don't think we have any Teddy Roosevelt survivors either when he came back and ran Bull Moose. But it's going to be a wild set of debates, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, Trump really decimated his debates were a physical act in the 2015-2016 cycle. And if you remember, one of the critiques of Trump during these debates was he doesn't act very presidential. And he said, look, I've got 20 opponents to beat. I can be presidential later. Well, you can debate whether he was, but he did just beat the heck out of these opponents.
One at a time, he took everybody down. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I do think it's going to be a substantive race, and I do know Byron York will be covering it as well as anyone for the DCExaminer.com. Byron York of Fox News, thank you. Follow him on Twitter at Byron York, and come right back, America. This is Bethany Mandel. Good morning, Bethany. Congratulations on the success that you're enjoying with your brand new book, Stolen Youth. How's it going?
I think it's going well. We hit the top 100 on Amazon the first 2 days that we announced the pre-order. So I'm happy with that.
Keep rolling with Stolen Youth. Bethany, I want to read you the first paragraph of a memo that the Richmond FBI office sent to D.C. It reads, FBI Richmond assesses the increasingly observed interest of racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, RMVEs, in radical traditionalist Catholic RTC ideology almost certainly presents opportunities for threat mitigation through the exploration of new avenues for tripwire and sort development. FBI Richmond makes this assessment with high confidence based on FBI investigations, local law enforcement agency reporting, and liaison reporting with varying degrees of corroboration and access. This memo was revealed. It was the source of extraordinary blowback. 20 attorneys general wrote to the FBI. Ray pulled the memo, and I wrote a Washington Post column about it, which has 3,000 angry comments mad at me for making something of it. Am I crazy to point out that this memo is crazy?
So explain this to me in plain English.
An intelligence analyst and... Yeah, the Catholic Church has radical traditionalists. I think in the Jewish tradition, they would be Hasid, right? They'd be people that you see in New York. Yeah, basically. And because this analyst thinks that they are radical, they're going to attract violent extremists.
So because people believe things strongly, they can become extremists. So how does that translate for the rest of America? In this house, we believe in science. A man can be a trans woman is a woman. All of the sayings that you repeat over and over and over, as if repeating them as a religious sort of prayer, incantation can become reality. So are all of those folks extremists also, or just the Catholics?
Just the Catholics. And obviously this analyst might get around to the sedum pretty soon. But my question is, just take a guess. We don't know who the writer is. We have no idea who it is, what their age is. We know they're in Richmond. Just take a guess. Who do you think? Age and demographic. What do you guess?
White man. In his
White
30s.
Man, young. And ideologically?
I mean, white man in his 30s in the FBI. I think I've already answered your question, Hugh.
Left wing, right? And this is just
course.
progressive ideology. This is not hard. So what do you do if you're Director Ray and you've got this scandal on your hands? What's your recommendation to him, Bethany Mandel?
So, I mean, if he actually wants to hear the answer or if he doesn't want to hear the answer, because those are two separate things, and the latter is what they normally want. But if I were a normal person thinking that the FBI operated in good faith and actually wanted to clean up their reputation, I'd say, you need some diversity in your ranks, and not just the diversity that you think of, but ideological and intellectual diversity. This is a problem that happens in every single sector of American society. Entertainment, publishing, the mainstream media especially, they hear the word diversity and they think, well, we need people with different skin tones. And they have these incredibly embarrassing blind spots because they cannot even fathom that anyone with conservative ideology exists and is not an absolute Bible-thumping bigot from Alabama. And
yeah, that's so well put. Incredibly deep blind spots. That's what it is. But Ray is a very good man, and the FBI traditionally has been very Catholic and very conservative, but I think they've been hiring for ideological diversity in the last 10 years, and as a result, they get boneheads.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they get boneheads outside of the ideological diversity. But the FBI have never been the good guys. I'm going to push back on you a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of the FBI historically. I'm not sure why it still exists. But, you know, we've just had someone announce that she's running for president today on the right, Nikki Haley. I'd love to see some people start talking about fixing the FBI if they're going to run for the highest office in this country.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I love the FBI because I worked with them when I was at Justice when you were not even born. And they were hardcore, and they used to trace terrorists and criminals. That's what they did. Yeah. And they were good at it, and they kept us safe from the Soviets. But Bethany, if you were Nikki Haley, what should she say about the Bureau?
I mean, I think she could say there are deep problems that are not easily solvable, and I'm going to go in there with my sleeves rolled up, and my team is going to figure out where the rot is and fix it. And it's not going to be easy because it's personnel as much as it is sort of their policies and what they do. But we need to go in there and figure out what's going on, or it needs to be disbanded.
You know, I don't want it disbanded because there are a lot of bad guys and their counterterrorism is terrific.
Yeah.
And organized. They got to stop fentanyl. They got to stop stuff. They do money laundering. I mean, they're really professional, but 5% can screw up an agency very badly. Yeah, Bethany Mandel on Twitter is actually Bethany Shondark on Twitter. She's the author of Stolen Youth, which is a wonderfully named book, which you can pre-order at Amazon, Stolen Youth. Bethany, thank you. Have a great week. I'll be right back. America Hour 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show straight ahead. Glory, America. Bonjour. Hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt from Studio West. And welcome to our new affiliate, Talk Radio WGSV, 1270 AM and 96.3 FM in Lake City, Alabama. It's Guntersville. We are so glad to have Guntersville join the Borg that are our 471 affiliates. I'm so glad you're there. On most Tuesday, when we are lucky, Mollie Hemingway, who you know from Fox News, if you know anything, or the Federalist, joins us. Good morning, Mollie.
Good morning.
Mollie, are you familiar with the Richmond FBI office memo about radical traditional Catholics?
Yes, it's horrible what they said about targeting traditional Roman Catholics, and then when they were exposed for doing it, the top FBI headquarters said, "Oh, well, this isn't quite how we would like it." How we would like to go after people.
Well, I want to go into the memo and to the mindset of someone. The Bishop of Richmond came out and denounced it today. 20 attorney generals wrote Director Ray and said, what is going on here? And I don't want to make too much of it because I actually admire a great deal of the Bureau. They keep us safe. They're after terrorists, drug cartels, and organized crime. But there's an ideological element of stupidity in this memo. I've actually read the memo. That I wonder, do you see it? And do you have a guess as to the person who wrote this? We don't know the name. We're never going to know the name. It was written on 23 January of this year. Who writes something like this?
I think that there is a much larger problem at the FBI than we would like. You know, it's common for people to say, well, there's just a few bad people who have politicized the Bureau. By and large, they do good work. But what this memo shows, it did not come from headquarters. It did come from one of these regional offices at Richmond. It shows that some of the stupidity and weaponization of the FBI against political opponents of Democrats runs really deep. And, it's part of what we have seen with how they've gone after parents at school who are criticizing school boards for how they are poorly running their children's schools, going after pro-life activists while letting more or less much of the abortion-supporting activists run wild, going after conservative or right-wing political rioters, which people are fine with usually, but not going after anyone who who did the 2020 riots that hurt so much of the country. So this is a bigger problem nationwide with the FBI, I think.
I think it is a big problem, and I think one of the signs, and I want to get your opinion on this, the memo relies almost exclusively on the Southern Poverty Law Center list of extremist groups. And AOC last week cited the Southern Poverty Law Center in one of her exhortations to the Jim Jordan Committee, and I'll have Congressman Jordan on tomorrow. What should people know about the SPLC, Mollie Hemingway?
So the Southern Poverty Law Center is a group used by a lot of left-wing people to go after conservative groups. They kind of had not awful origins of fighting racism in the South, but became basically just a hate group. You might remember several years ago, they published a map showing which Christian groups operate, and the map had the Family Research Council on it, and of course, one crazed individual used that map to go and try and murder everybody at the Family Research Council, which is a conservative Christian organization, shooting the guard on the main floor of the building who was so brave that he actually managed to save the rest of the people that this terrorist was trying to kill. But they frequently disparage conservative groups in completely ridiculous and unfair ways. They're poorly managed themselves, and they should not be used by anyone. They shouldn't be used by AOC, but they particularly shouldn't be used by a federal agency that purports to do law enforcement and decent investigation.
Now, I have a Washington Post column this morning that's gotten thousands of angry comments, and I didn't even include in it, because you only have 750 words, that the Southern Poverty Law Center is in here, and this is the basic information gap that I'm astonished by. You and I both know SPLC is not credible. It's a red flag. It doesn't mean that all left-wing agencies and activists are not credible, but the SPLC is well known and deeply, deeply understood to be not credible and completely indifferent to the truth. They go after the Alliance Defending Freedom all the time without ever, no nuance, no explanation of the good that the group does and why they support religious liberty, etc. So any memo that uses SPLC data is de facto, it's wrong. It can't be credible. But someone in the FBI doesn't know that. The author doesn't know it. The supervising agent doesn't know it. The head of the field office doesn't know it. And when it gets to the bureau in D.C., they don't know it. How can the FBI not know that, Mollie?
I think what I worry about is that they're in such a bubble that they don't have hardly anybody who's pushing back against some of this. We learned this during the Russia collusion hoax. We would get access to some of these emails and texts that were going back between agents, and it was really apparent that they did live in a left-wing echo chamber of sorts, that they didn't have a good handle on understanding what half the country thinks. They're also particularly bad about investigating the left wing. I actually interviewed Attorney General Barr for my last book, where he talked a little bit about this, that after the 70s, after the Church Commission, the FBI just got really scared about understanding the left, and they put all their resources into, going after groups on the right that might be a problem. Conservatives don't cause them trouble when they do it. Conservatives tend to be law-abiding. They think, well, if there's a bad person on the right, we'd want to know about it. Whereas the left thought this was just too politically dangerous to have the FBI investigating their groups. So they don't do a good job of infiltrating hardly any of these left-wing groups relative to what happens on the right. And then that culture is rewarded throughout the agency. You get promoted and elevated if you're doing a good job going after the right, but they don't do a good job going after the left. this is the only thing I can think of about why anybody would use the SPLC, which is, it is kind of a hate group. And I'm glad you mentioned that they go after Alliance Defending Freedom, which is one of the winningest, civil liberties organizations out there. They just win so many cases at the Supreme Court for all Americans about religious liberty. And for some reason, the SPLC wants to destroy them. And now they get rewarded by being used by the FBI.
Well, the SPLC hates them because they defend Jack, the baker in Colorado, who won't bake cakes that express messages with which his evangelical, he's not Catholic, his evangelical faith disagrees. Now, the Alliance Defending Freedom was founded by Alan Sears, who, like me, is a Catholic, and he believes deeply in religious liberty. But I want to go back to what do we do? I just talked to Bethany Mandel, and she had a very excellent point. Presidential candidates on the Republican side have got to come up with ideas for how do you fix the FBI, because we absolutely need the FBI. When I worked in justice in the early 80s, they were critical to stopping Soviet espionage. They were critical to breaking up the mob. Rudy Giuliani went up there to the Southern District of New York and they broke up the mob. They are critical to battling the cartels along with the DEA, a sister agency. We need it to work, Mollie. We need a national police, and they are the one that you will call if your child is abducted. You don't want the local Barney Fife doing the investigation. You want the FBI there. So how do we fix it? What do you think a Republican candidate for president should say? I think Christopher Wray's a fine director. I was very supportive of his being nominated. He's got a great reputation. He ran the criminal division. AUSA Luttig clerk. How do we fix it?
Well, that's nice that you like Christopher Wray, but he has overseen so many problems with the FBI, and instead of taking responsibility for them, cleaning house, letting the agents know they cannot be this way, he tends to be very defensive and protective of them, even when they're exposed as doing horrific things like the Russia collusion hoax, where they went after, the entire Republican Party with very bad pretext. And so you even saw in the last year or so, after all that we've learned about all the horrible things the FBI has done, you had a bunch of Republicans on the Hill who were trying to reward them with a massive new building, a really big increase in their budget. Why would they change anything they're doing when even the Republicans who know better are doing nothing to stop them? So I think, the budget should be used by Congress. People who are running for president absolutely have to understand the seriousness of the problem. And they have to realize that this is not just a few bad apples. It's not just a few bad things. Like, even when the FBI has been doing some good things, their record of doing really awful things goes back decades.
Mollie, quick reaction to my suggestion. We've got federal civil service protections for many people. I would remove them for anyone working at the FBI and the Department of Justice. I think you ought to be able to fire anyone who does anything like this immediately. No Merit Systems Protection Board referral. What do you think about that?
Hugh, that is an excellent idea, and it shouldn't just be for the FBI. It should be across the board in executive agencies. We have almost a fourth branch of government in this bureaucracy that is unconstitutional, and there's nothing we can do so long as we can't fire them.
That's it. And maybe it is bigger than the Bureau, but starting with the Bureau, Schedule A lawyers can be thrown out tomorrow. But everybody else in the federal government, I'll come back and talk about it. Mollie Hemingway, always a pleasure talking to you. See her on Fox News, follow her at The Federalist, follow her on Twitter at MZ Hemingway. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas. Good morning, Senator Cotton. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you. Happy Valentine's Day to all your listeners. Hope they have a special Valentine. You are extra special lucky that the fetching Mrs. Hewitt allowed you to be a Valentine of all people.
I am greatly blessed, as are you, by your spouse. Senator, you're on Judiciary, so I want to ask you about the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There is this memo from Richmond that called out radical traditional Catholics as an extremist threat based on the Southern Poverty Law Center. Somehow, the agent or the intelligence analyst didn't know that the SPLC has no credibility. The supervisor didn't know. The head of the field office didn't know. It got up to D.C. and they didn't know. And until it became public, nobody revoked it. How does anyone not know that the SPLC is not credible?
It's mystifying to me, Hugh. I've been explaining for years that the Southern Poverty Law Center is not just a left-wing front organization. It has its own deeply troubled history of racist and sexist activities in its own organization. So, No one in the government should be under any illusions of what the Southern Poverty Law Center is. But even if you didn't know anything about that left-wing group, you should have known from the very first moment you put eyes on this memo, inappropriate for the FBI out of the Richmond field office or anywhere else to be characterizing Catholics who choose to attend a traditional Latin-based mass in this way. Not only on the Judiciary Committee, but on the Intelligence Committee. I've seen so many of our intelligence officers, especially doing the analysis, lose their way in recent years, focusing on Americans, on people who attend Catholic Mass or go to school board meetings, or for that matter, focusing on allies overseas who are pursuing political agendas that they don't like. In no way is any of this foreign intelligence or related to our national security. Maybe they should be spending more time trying to figure out what we're shooting out of the skies over North America, or what China is up to in terms of trying to invade Taiwan at some point in the future, as opposed to focusing on Catholics who like to attend a Latin Mass.
Yeah, Senator, first impressions last. My first impression of the FBI goes back to 1984 at the Department of Justice, when they were hardcore on the hunt for the Soviets, the East Germans, and the Cubans in the United States, and they were doing great work. And I think Christopher Wray is a fine man with a distinguished record, but it's an agency with 38,000 employees, 14,000 of whom are special agents. And I don't know how to fix it, because this is not what they should be doing, especially when we have CCP agents overrunning the country at universities, stealing our secrets. And instead, we've got one of those 38,000 relying on the Southern Poverty Law Center to divert resources to investigate, admittedly very conservative Catholics who don't like Vatican II. But how do you fix that?
Well, Hugh, I can say that I'm confident the FBI has several thousand Catholics in it. Probably more than a few of those want to go to Catholic Mass as well. So we shouldn't paint with a broad brush about the FBI. But what Christopher Wray needs to do, what he should have been doing from the very beginning, is focusing on cleaning out the officers and agents in the FBI who've been captured by politics or ideology or bias. We should not have a Democratic FBI or a Republican FBI. We should have an FBI that focuses on genuine threats to our national security or to public safety from criminals. They should not be a partisan enforcement wing of either party. And fortunately, I don't think Director Wray has made that enough of a priority, especially in the last 2 years since the Biden crew took over. So he'll be in front of our committee later this spring, and I think he's going to get a lot of uncomfortable questions about why this kind of thing continues to happen inside of the Bureau. Not everyone should be accountable for the actions of a few wrong-headed agents and officers, but those agents and officers need to be held accountable.
Do you have, I'm going to lead up to a proposal about how one remedies this, but the Antifa movement continues to terrorize cities, and it continues to pop up. And then we continue to have mass shootings, as happened at Michigan State last night. How does an agency grapple with the former, the real threat, but not go down rabbit holes like radical traditionalist Catholics?
Hugh, I think a lot of that comes back to leadership from the top and down out to the field. And you have to have people from Chris Wray on out to your special agents focus on what their agents are doing. I remember something Bob Gates talked about in being Secretary of Defense and that mammoth department. You don't have to micromanage, but you need micro knowledge. You need to understand what your officers and agents are doing down to the field level and make it clear that we're focused on things like Antifa street militias or Al-Qaeda and ISIS or Russian and Chinese spies in our country, that we're not focused on parents going to school boards or Catholics going to a Latin Mass, even if you politically disapprove of those people.
So your friend, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, wrote in his memoir, Never Give an Inch, about the difficulty of getting the Department of State to do anything that they don't want to do, because it's a deeply, deeply politicized left-wing agency. Not the same at the CIA, by the way. He says they are fairly easily given. I think the only answer is to roll back civil service protections, which actually means you can't discipline or fire anyone for any reason, including stupidity, without Merit System Protection Board hearings, an endless process that divert time, energy, and mission. Therefore, the tendency of managers is simply to try and isolate the problem, not remove it. Is there a rewrite needed in the federal unionization and the federal protection of employees, Senator?
Well, so Hugh, first off, let me make a point about what Mike Pompeo wrote in his book, contrasting the CIA and his management there versus the State Department. Remember, those rules don't apply to the CIA. It's not just that the CIA attracts a different kind of person who has different priorities and wants to pursue a different kind of job. It's that the CIA director is not bound by those civil service protection rules. Bob Gates jokes because, he was the CIA director for his Secretary of Defense that the happiest moment he had when he took over the job of director of the CIA was when he got briefed by HR and explained that he could basically do whatever he wanted with any employee, irrespective of civil service rules.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's not the case when you're Secretary of Defense or when you're Secretary of State. So I do think that we need a substantial overhaul of civil service rules. We have way too many career bureaucrats at senior policy-making levels who are thwarting the plans and the policies of the elected leaders of our government. I know that President Trump at the end of his tenure was proposing a sweeping rewrite of the civil service rules to try to bring more political accountability into these departments and agencies to ensure that the people making policies, if they haven't been elected by our people, have been directly appointed and are accountable to persons who are elected.
The only major law that President Carter passed was the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act, which established, among other things, the Merit Systems Protection Board. And I had to deal with that at OPM when I was running OPM in the late 80s. It's a nightmare. You can't, so exempting agencies from that would be a wonderful thing, especially the Bureau is the CIA for domestic purposes, and DOD civilians should be subject to the same disciplines of the military. And when you were in the military, if you screwed up, what happened, Senator?
Well, you got whether it's a Article 15, as we call it in the Army, or Captain's Mast in the Navy, or other kind of military discipline, you got punished severely and swiftly. And that's how you maintain good order and discipline. That's part of the problem with the civilian ranks in the Department of Defense or throughout the government, that they have all this legal rigmarole and process in place to allow them to get away with anything. The stories are legion about, the bureaucrat who was watching online pornography at a government cubicle and couldn't even be disciplined for that. Or people who have, wasted taxpayer dollars on boondoggle trips all around the country and they haven't been disciplined or effectively disciplined, I should say. So we need a substantial rewrite of these rules. And I would say, Hugh, not just in the FBI or the Department of Defense, all across the government. We shouldn't have unelected bureaucrats at the Department of Commerce or other departments making policy for the American people. They are at most supposed to implement the policy of the President of the United States, who's accountable to the people, and the Congress, who writes the rules for our country.
Senator, you are a graduate of Harvard Law. You know your constitutional law. You know your importance of procedural protections for people. So I know you are informed by the ability to protect people from malign and stupid bosses. But when there is a DEI department in any state agency, I think it is a prima facie case of unconstitutionality because by definition, diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to touch on race. And I believe it is almost certainly unconstitutional for people to use any racial tool in the government. What do you think about DEI in the state setting?
Well, I agree with you, Hugh. This almost on its face constitutional violation. I hope the Supreme Court rules later this year in the context of admissions to higher education that you cannot have racial discrimination, no matter which race you're favoring and disfavoring. That, of course, extends to things like government employment or government policies. I think a new Republican president and cabinet needs to carefully scrub every inch of their departments and agencies to remove these people. I have legislation right now that would cap the salary that DEI consultants are getting in our military at what an E5 sergeant team leader would get. We shouldn't be paying people taking on the hardest and riskiest job in our military less than what we're paying PhDs in so-called diversity studies. But unfortunately, they're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars when sergeants are getting, just tens of thousands of dollars.
Last question, Senator. Is this a bipartisan issue about reforming the FBI and the rest of the bureaucracies where our national security is involved? Can you find colleagues across the aisle who realize this isn't Republican, Democrat? We just have to make these things work and not be run by the least common denominator.
Hugh, I wish it were, but I can't really say that it is, unfortunately. It's kind of like the issue with big tech. Republicans and Democrats seem to agree that big tech is out of control. Republicans think rightly that big tech censors conservative voices. Democrats complain that it doesn't censor conservatives enough. So again, I think the Democrats, especially in the Congress, think that the FBI and our intelligence communities aren't doing enough to harass parents attending school boards to stop left-wing indoctrination of their kids. Or the FBI isn't doing enough to stop these radical traditional Catholics who have the audacity to doubt or dispute decisions of the Catholic hierarchy or go to Latin Mass. It's like, the so-called disinformation and misinformation, which really is just information that is inconvenient to Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. So I wish I could say that it was a bipartisan issue. Maybe you can get bipartisan agreement on the problem, but so far I haven't seen bipartisan agreement on the solution.
Well, when the supermajority finally arrives, I hope you guys repeal Jimmy Carter's only legislative achievement and get back to competence. Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure. Thank you, Senator.